So I'm delighted to be back in Lviv once more. I'm not going to give all the details of that until a couple of days' time for operational security. We've been asked not to say too much. But I'm joined by Yevhen Filyak, if I've pronounced that correctly. Hopefully I have.
Hello.
I'm going to get him to introduce himself in a minute. He's a technologist. We're going to be talking about drone warfare, the evolution of drone warfare, the interaction between hardware, software, tactics, training, all of this kind of stuff. And we know that Western militaries are only just starting to pay a bit more attention to this, but I think the challenges of procurement and integration are not really being addressed fully at the moment, and that's going to be part of our discussion. But we're also going to be delving, I think, into the murky area of weaponized Russian historical mythology and how that plays in propaganda as well, because ultimately we're sitting at a place which Russia is trying to erase. It's trying to erase its history, its people, its identity for a variety of reasons. Many of them are lies, and some of them are sort of self-deluding sort of stories that the Russian elite tell themselves. So this is going to be a fascinating mixture of topics. And of course, we're going to put some links in the description of the video. If you want to follow up on Yevhen and his team's work, then we'll provide those links too. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, my name is Yevhen, and thank you for inviting me for this meeting. And for all my adult life, I was a manager of technological projects. And since the big invasion, we actually started our charity fund, which took care of technological dominance of Ukrainian army on the front line. So, and we are still in this field. So we know about this field from our experience.
And it's developing rapidly, isn't it? I mean, if you, and of course, I think a lot of people forget that Ukraine has been under informational attack for at least 2 decades. During Putin's reign, but it's been under physical or kinetic attack since 2014. So how would you compare the situation now, not just to 2022, but actually right back to 2014?
So, honestly saying, so I would like to start like Putin. You know, Putin started from Pechenegs. So I would like to start not from Pechenegs, but a little bit earlier. So. When I was visiting PhD student in Sweden, I have read the newspaper, Russian newspaper, in 2003 year. So, and then Russia changed their politics and they changed the military purchases, how to call it, system. So, and from that paper, I understood, like it was more than 20 years ago, that Russia is preparing for the war and not for the defending. Because from the arms that they were planning to modernize and to purchase, I saw that all the programs which they designed were coming together somewhere between 2025 and 2030. In order to put Russia in the best position to attack, to do large attack war in Europe, and it was the land war which they prepared. So, and I believe that all of us missed that, like all the countries, I mean, missed that point, because we were like we were trying not to look into that direction, you know. Oh, we don't want, if we don't look there, it doesn't exist, yeah. So,
and oil. I mean,
and
Europe's economy was fueled by cheap, plentiful Russian oil. So,
and also if you look on who was promoting Russian interests in Europe also and in US, these were people who are connected to the business, which Russians did in Europe and yes. And from the history, we know that the personal interests quite often, how to call it, that money buy some people's souls, let's say, like that.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting. So these investments are taking place in an offensive military force, but when they actually invaded full scale, despite 8 years of Ukrainian resistance, they seem to have the assumption that the regime would topple, that people would be glad to see the Zelensky government go, despite the fact it was elected with a pretty huge majority, and not just in Western Ukraine, but across the country. They seem to think that people would just sort of drop everything and, you know, praise their liberators and bring out bread and salt, and they'd have a nice military parade. There seems to be a conflict here between investing in large-scale military equipment and then these extraordinary assumptions that they would take over quite quickly. What do you think led them to believe that? And you've talked about people's souls being bought. They seemed not just to invest in military equipment, they seemed to have invested heavily in what they thought were assets and agents throughout the Ukrainian state.
So I totally agree with you, and I think that there is one big reason for that, and this reason is that we tend to think about other people in the way we are thinking about ourselves. So what Russians thought that Putin thought, and his team, not only Putin, that the Ukrainian state is similar to Russian state. So Russia has the power going from top to bottom. So and they thought that if they decapitate the Ukrainian government, and they did it really well at the beginning of the war. So what they did, they disconnected the Ukrainian government from the army. So they killed a lot of communication channels and so on and so on. So and they thought that Ukraine will fall because they thought about Ukraine in the way they are thinking about Russia. So but Ukraine is different. Ukraine is a democratic society where the power goes from bottom to top. And from my subjective perspective, I believe that first week Ukraine was not ruled by anybody. So the first week, the biggest commanders on the field were the battalion commanders, and the army was autonomously functioning. So and the society was autonomously functioning. So I have heard from some Americans who came 2 years ago to Ukraine, and they told that probably Ukraine is the most developed civil society in the Western world because we faced the challenges and we had to, to proliferate these.
I've spoken to a lot of civic society leaders, and there seems to be this extraordinary feature of Ukrainian society, and I hope the history books really get to grips with this, because certainly in 2014 it seems that without that civic society effort, Ukraine would absolutely have fallen.
Yes,
and the
totally.
same in 2022.
Yeah, totally. Yes, yeah.
But what's behind that? Because obviously, also having experience of Russia, you not only do you not see that process, any of that emerges, any emergent trust between groups or people is actively destroyed by the state. So how has this flourished in Ukraine? And in some ways, how has the government ceded, in some ways, control to large groups of people and allowed them to kind of carry on and do their thing? Are they tolerating it, or do they see the advantages of that civic society sort of energy?
So, first of all, why Ukraine is so different from Russia? Because of extremely different historical background. So before Ukraine was occupied by Russia more than 300 years ago, Ukraine was always to some extent like a normal European society with power of law. So, but Russia, for all the ages since their foundation, because Russia took its name. It's not natural name of Russia. Russia was called Moscow state, and Moscow state it is the last piece of Mongols empire, and Moscow state always had law of power. It's totally different. So, and Ukrainian government now doesn't choose if they select civil society or not. It is there. It was there for ages. So it was just suppressed by Imperial Russia before, and then by the Soviet Union. So it just existed. So it existed when people talked behind their closed doors in their apartments. And so Ukrainians kept this feeling of power of law. And Ukrainian government, as I told you, doesn't choose this. So if you see every Ukrainian president who was elected, it doesn't matter if he was fan of more autocratic or more democratic ways of ruling, they ended always with civil society. So it is like invisible force in Ukraine that pushes every president to that direction. And in Russia, it's totally opposite. Every president which is elected, it doesn't matter if he is due to some democratic reforms like Yeltsin was, they always end on the autocratic or tyranny or something like that.
They'll always end up with it's just manipulating the system to stay in control, and absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it? We'll come back to that because we had a brilliant discussion yesterday about the influences of the Golden Horde, the Mongol Horde versus Byzantium. We'll come to that in a minute. But let's talk about how this civic society force has been critical in shaping the drone war. Because unfortunately, we also know that Russia has had some innovations, but they've also been able to bring a certain amount of scale to their drone production. But it seems that the ecosystem of drone warfare is actually rather different in Ukraine and Russia. And
totally different, yeah.
Someone's described it as a battle between a horizontal versus a vertical approach to the mass production of these things. So what's your view on the different ecosystems, and which one is going to win? Because this is the struggle between the capacity to innovate and the capacity to manufacture and then deploy effectively.
Okay, so Russia and Ukraine have totally different systems of economics. So, okay, I will start from the different point. So Ukraine and Russia, as we mentioned, have totally different societies. And when Russia attacked, Ukrainians started to fight against Russia. So, and Russia was the second biggest and second strongest army in the world, and it still is. So why we were able to survive? Because of two things. First, that Russians started to fight not usual war for them. So because Russian army is tightly controlled from the top, and when they send troops to do the mobile warfare, like Germans did, like Americans do, like British do. So it means that the officers should have a lot of independence to take decisions in the situation where their battalion is like 20 kilometers ahead of the rest of the army. So what Ukrainians did, the Ukrainians destroyed their commanders, and the regiments just stood on the roads without knowing what to do. So often they were dropping the tanks, and so on. So, and that actually saved Ukraine, because Ukraine is extremely good in such conditions because of this power of every person. So I know a lot of stories when the locals, like farmers, were fighting against like 20 farmers were fighting against 200 Russians. So, and Ukrainians won that battle. And the same we have in the industry, that Ukrainians, in order to survive against this huge monster, we had to innovate, because we knew that we are smaller, we have less money, we have less arms. Do you remember when nobody wanted to give arms to Ukraine, because nobody expected that we are going to survive more than 30 days?
And I'll say a little odd thing which people find, I mean, people watching this channel know I'm not a huge fan of Boris Johnson's domestic political agenda. But in hindsight, he seems to have provided a fairly critical class of munition at some kind of scale at exactly the right time. And I think history will debate about why he did that, but was that important? With the
totally
in-laws,
Totally yes. So, and from my side, I want to say thank you for all the support Great Britain did, and not only for arms, because honestly saying, we could survive without Western arms. But it would cost us more people and more blood. But in such a difficult times, to have a friend who is consistently supporting you, it values even more.
And he hasn't stopped talking about Ukraine, which is also interesting. There's maybe not that much self-interest to him to carry on, but he's still engaged, which is good. That we know that there's other forms of support which we can't talk about, but also Britain does seem to be very engaged in the drone war. Maybe not as much as it should be, but out of many Western militaries, I get the impression that Britain is trying to learn and disseminate some of the lessons of what's happening in the drone warfare. What are the challenges you see it? Because, well, first of all, let's go back and describe, drones aren't just a product. It's a process, it seems to me, and there needs to be a lot of agility. Again, we talked about this yesterday. It's apparent there needs to be a lot of agility and the ability to hack and change hardware and software with incredibly fast iterations. How Western military is going to cope with this, and particularly their procurement processes and their bureaucracy? It seems that we'll struggle to really internalize this.
So you're asking how can Europe copy, for instance, Silicon Valley? It's impossible. Why? Because Silicon Valley, it's not only the money, it's not only...
Or even Kiev Valley, or whatever the equivalent, which is...
So it is like the values and the way of thinking. People which live in Silicon Valley think differently. So, and that's why it's hard to copy. So the same in Kyiv. So Ukraine had to survive, and we evolved a lot, and we invented a lot in drone warfare. Actually, Ukraine invented drone warfare, and nowadays 80% of all the casualties which Ukraine does on the front line to Russia is made by drones. Out of this 20% which is left, 18% is made with help of drones. So only 2% of the casualties are made in the traditional, which was traditional 2 or 3 years ago way. So what does it mean? It means that every NATO country which will face Russian army now on the front line will lose 98%, will get 98% casualties from the type of weapon which NATO countries are not used to. And NATO countries are not trained to hide and to protect against it. So, and in the opposite, NATO countries will be able to do only 2% damage from expected on the front line to the Russian army. So, and that's why ability of NATO countries to copy Ukrainian drones and maybe to purchase them is critical, really, to the front line. So the revolution is happening so fast that probably citizens in Europe who are used to changes in the warfare in decades, they missed this critical point. And probably Europe can't copy Ukrainian innovation ecosystem, but it can flourish, and so Europe can collaborate with it.
And I mean, NATO commanders have said, well, yeah, but hang on a second, the war in Ukraine is not being fought in a traditional NATO fashion. You don't have air dominance, you don't have aerial power, NATO has this, etc. You don't have naval power. Well, yes, you've been able to clear the Black Sea Fleet out, but you don't have a navy. So actually, our traditional platforms are not dead. That will give us dominance over the battlefield. Is this an illusion?
I believe yes. Why? Because look, Ukraine without the fleet was able to sink half of the Russian fleet, and to lock the other half of the Russian fleets. Of the Russian fleet in the ports. So Russians, as you see, Russian warships are afraid to leave the port. So Russians are starting to copy, and I predict that in 2 years or 1 year and a half, Russians will have this or similar drones as Ukraine has in the sea. And please imagine that, for instance, Russian drones are launched against Royal Navy fleet, and I believe
civilian shipping. I mean,
and civilian shipping.
That's a serious issue.
Yeah, and it's using these drones. Royal Navy has no measures to defend against these naval drones yet. All the means which Royal Navy has, they will destroy maybe, I don't know, 20% or 30% of that drones, but 70% of them will hit the targets. So, and then the Royal Navy is the only reason which led to survival of Great Britain in the Second World War, and it will not the case in the war against Russia.
And of course, we had a shipbuilding industry. We had huge commercial fleets. We don't actually have any of that anymore.
Yes, and my admiration that Great Britain is one of only few countries in the world who came to Ukraine and who are trying to learn something from the Ukrainian warfare. But I believe not on the measures which you need. Yeah.
The other argument they'd make is, well, hang on a second, Russia has not proven itself capable at maneuver warfare, at really, taking swathes of territory and then holding it. So are we seriously saying that Russia could overrun Europe? I think most and many experts are saying that that's not the case. But are we focusing on the wrong kind of war? If Russia was to start mass drone incursions, close down European airspace, that would have a devastating economic blow. They don't necessarily have to invade full scale. They can use a mixture of sort of hybrid drone warfare, shut down our economy, and then attack informationally to destabilize our regimes and to install compliant governments, far right-wing governments, far left-wing governments that spout Kremlin narratives. How do you see this offensive against Europe, which is definitely coming? How do you see that playing out?
So what I believe is, do you remember this attack of drones, of Russian drones into Poland?
Yes.
They have sent...
That was in the media, by the way. I mean, a lot of them are being ignored, but that one definitely got proper coverage. Yeah.
So finally, so what Russia have done, they have sent 20 drones into Polish territory, and Poland is the most guarded and most secure place on the eastern border of European Union. And the Russians have sent not Shahids there, they have sent Gerberas, as far as I remember. So these are the least advanced their drones and least least dangerous. So, and what they did, I believe, they tested first NATO anti-airspace space defense, and they tested NATO response. And in both that cases, Russia won. So first, Poland and all the NATO allies were able to shoot only 2 out of 20 drones, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I heard 4, but that's
still
not,
yeah, it's
who knows the reality.
Yeah. So, and okay, like 80 or 90% of drones survived. So, can you imagine if Russia have sent not 20 drones, but 700 drones, as it does against Ukraine every night? So,
and they were shot down by F-16s or F-35s, I believe. So it's Poland, not an economic ratio of offensive weapon to how you're countering.
So what Russia did, Russia tested if they can overload air defense in NATO countries, and they got extremely happy results for Russia. So it means that in a couple of days, by sending 3,000 drones in 4 days, they will totally overload European air defense. And they will destroy all the beautiful fancy radars and so on, as Trump says, and so on and so on. So, and the second point is that Russia tested NATO response. And NATO response was extremely weak. So when I was trained for the negotiations back into my young years, when I was trained how to do business in the business school. So I was trained that there are 3 types of negotiation, of the positions in the negotiation. Is passive position, is aggressive position, and assertive position. So Europe is used to talk to people from the assertive position, like we care about our needs and we care about your needs. Mm-hmm. So, but an issue is that Russia is in the aggressive position. So we care about our own position, and Russia doesn't care about other countries. So, and the issue with aggressive people and with the aggressive countries is that you can't ask them to move into assertive position when you are in the assertive or passive position. You can only show them that you are aggressive as well, and from the position of power, you will talk to them on the same level and then move down to the assertive talk. So, and this is what Europe is missing, that Putin, every time Europe or US comes with the words, we understand you, we understand that you need something, blah, blah, blah. It's rubbish. So Russia only understood the words of power. And only then they started to talk, always through all their 1,000 years of history, since the Mongols. So, and only then they told, okay. Oh, I see that you are a powerful man. We can talk to you.
Erdogan is a classic example, isn't it?
Yeah, classic example. Yeah.
You know, their Russian MiG tested Turkish airspace. They had 10 warnings to turn away, and then they're shot out of the sky.
Yeah.
But it reset, as you say. It's like, okay, let's take it down from aggression. So we've done that bit. Now we know who's who. But that's a problem for democratic leaders, especially European democratic leaders.
So we have a case of Macron, the French leader, who has very strong position now, and he learned this lesson. Unfortunately, his party has some domestic issues, but this is maybe the first leader who in Europe who learned this lesson. Some of the leaders also learned this, like Great Britain or Italy. So, but let's see how it goes.
Meretz has adopted the language.
Yeah, exactly. A dramatic change.
Especially for a German leader.
Yeah, exactly.
Some would argue the actions perhaps aren't exactly there. Then again, like Denmark, Germany is investing in co-productions of things like missiles and certain systems. It's a radical change. Well, let's we've covered a huge amount of territory, but let's turn back to the thing that we teased at the start. And this is the sort of discussion we had about, because there are certain, I would say, not Russophobic like ourselves, there are certain people who are in some ways slightly more amenable, and they'll take on certain historical narratives. And one of those is that, yes, of course, the Mongol horde had a great impact, but the influence of Byzantium also had a great impact.
And
Russia, the Russian state, the vertical state, is shaped as much by Byzantine inheritance as it is of the Mongol horde. Now, you think that's not the case. But I think this is really important, because this negotiating style, the kinetic aggression, but also the diplomatic aggression, the information aggression, and the way of interpreting history even, it's crucial to understand where that comes from.
Okay, so you are actually repeating the things Russia wants us to believe in, but it's not the truth. It's the lie they are spreading. Why? Because Byzantium was the Eastern Roman Empire. So, and Byzantium or Eastern Roman Empire was based on the power of law. So, but Mongols was the law of power. So, as I mentioned you before, so Russians took from Byzantium only the church. That's only the thing they took, and they try to convince us that they are some Byzantine offsprings. Rubbish. They are typical. So the Russian state is typical last offspring of the Mongol Empire with the law of power. When the Russian Tsar, up to the revolution in the 20th century, Russian Tsar was the ruler, but not only the ruler, but the owner of all the people in the Russian Empire. So and they had special phrase when they addressed the Tsar, that I'm your slave. So even the ministers told that to the Tsar that I'm the slave of Tsar and I'm the slave of God. So it's totally different from the British tradition, from German tradition, from the traditions which we have got from the Roman Empire. So
yeah. And the very word for state, isn't it? Государство is basically Государ is the head figure, and then he's the embodiment of the state as well. There's a pattern here, and this idea hasn't really occurred to me before, but it seems that what they're doing is looking around to see who the most powerful, the biggest bully is in the playground, or who can exert the most power. And it's almost like they're mirroring that to say, okay, we're going to take on certain features of you, and then we're going to call ourselves that because we want to be the biggest bully in the playground. So to start with, it's Byzantium, right? And we're going to copy some of the superficial features, and then we're going to say that we are you and you are us, and we can almost internalize that power. Then you fast forward, and of course via Rome as well, there's the huge aspiration there. Then you have sort of Peter the Great, 18th century, and they're like, okay, who's the most powerful bully in the playground? It's the European powers, right? So we're going to mirror some of your civilization, and in some way that will give us the power that you've got, or it will allow us to convince you that we're like you. There seems to be this copying or mirroring. And then the Soviet Union, 20th century, it's like, what idea or what image can we create to once again convince you that we're not so different? But all of it is using culture and identity actually as a mask or a cover for what essentially is military aggression. And that includes culture, includes Pushkin, includes the whole canon of the so-called Russian culture that we in the West still like, yeah, Putin's nasty, but they've got a great culture. I think we're missing the dynamic of what's really going on here.
So I believe that we are mixing two topics together. So first about copying. So Russians are copying a lot, but they are copying more like they are copying the wrapping, but not the content. So and you mentioned Peter the First, like the biggest Russian lobbying Tsar and so on. And what he did, he copied some features of Europe, but he kept all the systems. And please also remember that Peter the First was still paying Mongols, not the Mongols, but Tatars. So Peter the First was the last Tsar of Russia, then called Moscovia, who still paid taxes to Tatars. So they were still part of the Tatars world even in the Peter's time. Can you imagine that?
That I didn't know. That's fascinating. Yeah.
And this is the first Tsar who stopped paying that. So they tried to stop that from time to time, but they didn't really do it until the Peter the First. So this is the first topic. So what is specific for Russians that they are copying attributes, but they are leaving the meaning and they are keeping the meaning. So, and how I treat Russia as a country, I treat Russia as a country as a lot of nations occupied by very autocratic system, and they destroyed their culture, their minds, and so on, so on, so on. And now it became self-supporting system. So, and I believe that maybe our goal, our mission is to help them to become independent again from this 1,000-year, how to call it, terror, something like that. And another topic about Russian culture, how we call it. So when it happened that Russian culture started to be popularized in Europe, so when a lot of wars were happening in Europe. France was fighting against Russia. So, but after that, and in France they had a lot of how to call it, opposition against Russia. So, and afterwards, in 19th century, France decided to make alliance with Russia, and they had to change public opinion. So Russia started to pay French, how to call it, opinion leaders to write books about like his historical figures. Was it Voltaire who wrote the book about Peter the First or not? Am I right?
He certainly corresponded with Catherine the Great, as they call her. That projected Russia as a participant in the great European philosophy. However, it's undermined by the Marquis de Custine, who gave a less flattering portrait.
And do you know that he was paid for that before? And he was paid to make a very how to call it,
flattering
portrait, but
it didn't turn out that way.
It didn't turn that way. So he took the money and he published totally opposite book after his visit.
And he made that observation as well that you've made about copying the superficial detail, copying the superficial wrappings, but having no interest in the mechanics and the system of civilization, European civilization. And that's as true in the 90s as it was then. Again, it's interesting. It seemed to me that the Bolsheviks were essentially like parasites in order that a few people could live almost a middle-class standard of living. And then in the 1990s, you have the country being sort of raped so that a very small number of people can live like the new aristocracy, which is Western oligarchy. Yes, we kind of have oligarchs, but we also have a huge middle class. So again, there's this idea of the elite wanting to be like or model itself on what it sees as the most powerful people, but not copying anything to do with the system or processes that produce that wealth.
And I believe that current war is not between Ukraine and Russia. You see that big alliance formed, it was formed not this year, but it was formed like 10 years ago between Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. These are 4 states which are allied now. And I believe that this is a big war between 2 worlds, like the world of slaves and slavery, because China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea is actually the slavery states. It doesn't matter how you call it, but it's really slavery. So, and the world of the free world and the free people. So, and in Ukraine we have like the first big battle of this big war. So, and I would like everybody to pay attention to that. And this war, and I would like to pay attention that this war didn't start in 2022, didn't start in 2014. It started to be prepared in 2002 or 2003, I don't remember exactly the year, when Russians and China, by the way, started almost simultaneously rearming their army to build attacking army. So it's not our choice. We happen to be dragged into this war. And if you remember the history, because now we live in the history where Great Britain exists, when Ukraine exists, when Poland exists. But from the history we know that there are times when countries disappear and without the memory that such country existed, like Saxonia, like Sardinian kingdom, like a lot of countries in Siberia which were totally devastated by Mongols. So, and they disappeared, and who remembers them? Nobody remembers them. So, and Mongols occupied all that Siberia. Who would believe into that 4 decades before the Mongols occupied that? Everybody would say, what are you talking about? There are so many powerful states who can defend themselves. Yes? So now we are in the age where we are on the existential point. If we exist, or as countries or as societies of free people, because if we don't exist, or if we stop to exist, because nowadays Europe is the first time when the democracy won since the Roman Empire. Can you imagine? So if we lose, will it be next 2,000 years of autocracy or not?
I was about to say this has echoes of, Greek city-states versus Sparta. It's an ancient kind of struggle of informal despotic power versus the original, civic society, which is, culture of Greece.
So I would say that Sparta is still to some extent democratic culture, but I would say like Greece against Persians.
Yes.
So it's more like accurate comparison. Yeah.
And that even though this is the inheritance of Europe, it seems that is understood far better here. It has resonance here, and we've kind of forgotten what it takes to sustain democracy.
So we lived a lot of decades in peaceful times, and we are used to that already, and that's good. I would love that my children live in the peaceful times as well, but we didn't choose this war. So we are in this situation when we can fight against aggressive Persia or Mongols, because they will not care about our willingness to fight or not. We will be slaves, or we will be dead. So that's
worse, you never will have existed, because they'll rewrite history. They'll erase, not physically, but they'll erase every narrative about your existence.
And what is interesting about every empire, like Persia and like Mongols, is that when they are occupying a new state, they are taking people from these newly occupied territories, and they force them to fight in the new occupational wars. So we will fight, but we will fight to defend ourselves and our freedom, or we will fight in Russian army to occupy more territory for Russia. So, and it is our choice how we do it. Yeah.
And a lot of people would leave, but enough people would stay behind probably to, fulfill.
Yeah, and this is actually the case what happened to Ukrainians who left on the eastern part of Ukraine. So because Ukraine is a democratic country, we have the law. So, and only people go to the army according to the law or according to their willingness. So, and some people are left on the territories occupied, and they were forced to enter Russian army and to fight against Ukrainians. Yeah. So this is how it is in Russian army.
That's almost like a hidden genocide. That's another topic.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Well, we're probably out of time here. We can't talk about the conference we're at, but we will. The channel will find out more about that once once that's over. But I look forward to more conversations, especially about the evolution and integration of drone warfare in the future. And huge pleasure speaking today, Yevhen. Thank you so much.
Me too, sir. Me too. Thank you.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.